Alrighty, we're here, back yet again, the dynamic trio.
When you said, you know how when people when people do their intros, they're like, "We're out here." You just flipped it. You're like, "We in here," because quarantine.
We are in here in our respective home offices. This is my home office. This is the couch that I work from each day. Cool. So for the audience's sake, I'm based here in New York City, the epicenter. The world is ending right outside because we're recording during the coronavirus situation. Jay, where are you at?
I'm still in sunny Arizona.
Very sunny. Dr. B?
And I'm halfway between North Texas.
Is that halfway between New York and Arizona?
Maybe a little closer to Arizona.
Not the geography person. I remember Dr. B giving me so much crap about my lack of geography knowledge.
Yeah.
We can talk about that. But just so everyone's aware of who each of us are and what we'll be talking about today. We're going to be covering a variety of things, but first off, just want to introduce each other. I'm Michael Navarro, host of this podcast interview setup, and basically the goal of this podcast and show is to help people acquire more information, knowledge, and around exercise science, nutrition science, and all these different concepts and things, and also understand how to critically discern all the other misinformation that's coming from them in multiple ways, because as we all know, especially right now, there's a lot of information that's going on, but what of it is good and which of it is not the best that you should listen to. I've been studying exercise science and nutrition for a while. I can't say I have a degree, but that's why I have these two on here. So I'll go ahead and let them introduce themselves. Go ahead, Jay.
I'm very short and sweet. Name is Jay. I am a power coach, a bodybuilder, and 100% a nerd. And that is my
former roommate.
Yes.
Dr. B?
Well, I'm Dr. Berger, and I'm an exercise physiologist with the University of North Texas. And I'm not going to tell you how long I've been doing what I've been doing, but I got a big birthday coming up this year, so it's been a while. My interests involve the science of weight management, whether it's nutrition or exercise. Mode of exercise is resistance training, believe it or not. I know I don't look it, but I like that a lot. And I'm just delighted to be back here. I read online that I've been dropping knowledge bombs, and so I'm going to you're going to be dropping some knowledge bombs tonight, and with all good luck.
Yeah, all the knowledge bombs will be dropped. I've got the fuses ready to be lit, so all we need now is your fire knowledge.
Yeah.
Cool. Jay, it cut out a little bit when you talked, so I'm just going to summarize what you said. Jay is a buddy of mine, a former roommate. He is a powerlifting coach, bodybuilder himself. Probably one of the best people that I've seen who coaches athletes. He has a couple athletes who are also powerlifters in states, so like the state competitions and nationals as well. So he also knows his stuff. But today, what we're going to be covering is some of the some topics around the coronavirus situation that's going on, things that you can do to stay healthy, and also how to discern, like I mentioned earlier, discern some of this information that's floating around, how to understand what of it is credible, what sources to look for, and then I'm sure at some point we'll be trailing off into some other things that will hopefully be useful as well. But
that's not something we normally do. We normally stay right on subject.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Yeah, totally don't go off on tangents.
Yeah.
Never, not us.
No, not at all. That's why our podcasts aren't, an hour long. But wanted to start with you, Dr. B. So when we were talking last night, you were saying how you just returned from Washington, D.C., and you were providing some education information to other personal trainers. So in a way, you train the trainers on specific concepts and principles and such. So I'd love to hear one, what you spoke with them about, and then I know that was a little while ago. So in this current climate, if you were going to do that right now, what would be some of the things you would recommend to those trainers and coaches?
Okay, that's a great way to start this podcast. First of all, I should tell everybody I'm an exercise physiologist, PhD. I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not a medical doctor. I don't specialize in disease transmission per se. So my comments and my answers tonight are going to be very limited to what I do know. But what I do know is the scientific method. What I do have at a PhD is the ability to ask a good question, collect data, analyze those numbers, and make some sense out of it. And so I think anybody who has good scientific reasoning is probably appalled by what's going on right now. We'll probably talk about that as the podcast goes on. But I guess to answer your question about, what would I tell a trainer if I was back in DC this week? I was in DC when this whole thing was starting to erupt here in the US. I think that it's really important to always be mindful of the unique needs of your client. Some people need to have their hands held, and that's why they're seeing you. They need to have that kind of support and that kind of, that kind of social guidance. The other issue corresponds to, just the questions that you're getting from your clients. And so what I typically tell my students and I tell my trainers when I'm working with them is just be very candid about what you do and you don't know. So don't be afraid to say, I don't know. I'm going to have to look that up for you, because even among the experts right now, we're in some pretty uncharted territory. So to summarize, I would say, when you're working with a client and you're a trainer yourself, I think it's really important for you to know your own limitations, to know what their limitations are, and then you can write an exercise prescription that's suitable for both of you. And that makes for a more comfortable relationship, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I know it's been a little bit since you've personally trained people yourself, but again, kind of want to ask the same question. If you were working with a client right now, what would be some of the things that you would share with them, either to keep them on track with whatever their fitness goals are, and also just to what might be weathering the storm in their mind about all of this? Because I know a lot of people right now are dealing with a lot of psychological, mental stress around everything that's going on.
Well, that's a good question too. So I think I think the psychological impact should not be underestimated. I mean, people aren't used to this. People, I don't feel comfortable, talking to you guys from 3 different state perspectives, but this is kind of how we have to do things this day and age. So
don't worry, I can't cough on you from the computer, so you're safe.
What's that?
I said I can't cough on you through the computer, so you're safe.
Yeah. Okay. I appreciate that, Mr. New York City epicenter. But I mean, just to collect my thoughts on this, I know that this is not something that a lot of people would agree with, but I think at the very least, I guess I wouldn't go so far as to say stop watching the news, stop listening to the news, but be critical about the reports that you're hearing and the things that you're reading. The news media, it's lacking journalism, and it's lacking this desire to inform the public and more to entertain or to shock or to engage the public. And those are very different goals from traditional journalism. So I'm critical of clients who come in and say, hey, I heard this on the news today. Well, okay, that's why it's news. It's a rare thing that happens. That's why we call it news. It's not something that's necessarily going to happen to you. So calm down. But the important thing, I think, is, just when you're working with clients, is to be flexible. And I'm going to draw on my experience with healthy air travel to answer the question, because when you travel, you have to be flexible. You don't know if your hotel, well, maybe you do, but you don't know what your hotel is going to have in terms of a gym. You don't know how much time you're going to have in terms of your cardio. And so you've got to be flexible. And so if there's one key point that I can get people to think about in this podcast with respect to working with clients is, hey, you don't have access to a weight room anymore. Now's a good time to start working on your cardio. You can be outside, you can bike, you can walk, you can run. It might not be desirable, but there is something to be said for aerobic fitness. So in a simple sense, be flexible, be aware that this is something that you've probably seen before with business travel or some other interruption in your life, the birth of a child, new work hours at work, at the office. You got to be flexible. Don't be too hard on yourself, because if you are, then you're not going to lose as much as you think, and you're just going to make yourself more psychologically vulnerable to all this terrible news that you're hearing about. You got to rise above it and be flexible to make that happen.
Yeah. One thing that you said caught my attention when you said go outside, because I can't necessarily go outside right now, right? Since I'm here. So
Not in New York.
Right. So for cardio recommendations or just exercise recommendations in general, and Jay, you can answer this too if you have some ideas. What are just some general things that indoor people can do to improve their cardiovascular fitness or even other areas of fitness? Indoor exercises. Either of you can take this.
Oh, well, in terms of cardiovascular fitness, to be quite honest with you, I'm not really certain what people can do indoors as far as improving cardiovascular fitness. I mean, you could take laps around your dining table, I guess. It seems kind of silly, but you're restricted, like yourself, Michael. You're in New York City. They're hammering down a little bit the going outside. They're a little bit more harsher about you going outside in New York City right now. So it might seem silly, but I mean, it's just because you're inside doesn't mean it's not gonna gain the same effects that you would if you were taking a 10-minute walk outside, right?
So I'll jump in here real quick then, just to share some of the things that I've been doing. One thing that I like a lot that I've been using is I bought a jump rope. And now, mind you, I'm not balling. I don't have this big old apartment. So I've been able to make it work with the small apartment that I have here. And obviously a jump rope is a great bit of cardiovascular exercise. So there's that. Burpees are fantastic. I hate burpees, but also love them at the same time. And then also I bought a kettlebell, and there's a lot of things you can do with a kettlebell swings, kettlebell cleans and clean and jerks and all those different things. So just a little bit of recommendations there on that.
Now that you mention it, maybe this is a perfect opportunity for people to look to our CrossFitters, because the CrossFitters have they have fairly good cardiovascular capacities, and a lot of the stuff that they do when it comes to their conditioning work, a lot of the stuff that they do is body weight. You could look up the hashtags on Instagram, like for CrossFit. You could look up the hashtags for CrossFit. You'll see a whole bunch of CrossFitters still getting their Metcon workouts at home with very minimal equipment, sometimes with zero equipment. It's mostly body weight. And they'll do that for short intervals, very high intensity. So that's one really good way that you could increase your cardiovascular fitness, is short, high intensity workouts.
Yeah, I want to shout out one person too who's been doing a really great job on some of this home fitness stuff. Is former podcast guest as well, Andres Vargas, the Strength Cave, former ASU student. He's an excellent just resource for general health and fitness. So if you're looking for things like that, then I would definitely recommend following him, the Strength Cave, on Instagram and all of his other platforms and channels. But yeah, just wanted to shout him out there. So attaboy Andres.
And YouTube is a great resource, right? You could look up no equipment workouts, at home workouts, and you'll get so many hits, right? That's what the Google machine is for. You use it.
That's right. I want to turn it back to Dr. B here real quick. So as we know, right, with health and just general health and fitness, and the more healthy and fit you are, typically the less likely you are to contract disease, or at least have a lower severity of the symptoms and everything. So what in regards to the coronavirus, but also just general diseases and other issues in general, what are some things that people can do to mitigate their risk of like through health, through fitness and nutrition, what are some things that people can do to mitigate their risk for contracting it, and also just mitigating the risk or severity of experiencing the symptoms?
So, as a PhD on this panel, my hands are tied. I can't go outside. I can't do much in the way of inside stuff. And how do I deal with this to improve my overall system? So, one of the things I would say, let me start with some basic things that the public really struggles with. One thing to think about is you need to reduce the number of calories that you're consuming in all likelihood. I mean, if you really are not able to get outside and be as physically active as you normally are, I know this is not something that you want to hear, but you probably should take a look at your caloric intake and try to reduce that, because you're not burning as many calories as you normally would. Think about that very carefully. Another one that's semi-obvious, but I think we need to mention, is that if you vape, if you smoke, if you do anything to compromise your cardiorespiratory system, stop doing that now, because God forbid, should you get sick, this COVID-19 seems to influence the lungs more than anything else. About 50% of people present with actually GI problems. And so I'm going to be real careful about what I recommend, but there are some studies out there that show that consumption of probiotics, prebiotics, consumption of high fiber foods will help to colonize the gut with bacteria that might improve that aspect of your immune system. So if you're not lactose intolerant and you can handle a little bit of yogurt, you might want to start considering that, because there is some evidence out there that shows that when you have a diversity of bacteria in the gut, there is some reason to believe that people withstand at least GI distress a little bit better. So between the smoking and the vaping for the lungs, and maybe some probiotics, prebiotics for the gut, you're at least stacking the deck more in your favor of, hopefully we hope, preventing a disease from progressing, or keeping your immune system strong, so that if you do get infected, you can fight it off more effectively.
Yeah. How does, if at all, how does exercise specifically contribute to improving your immune system and just general defense against diseases and other issues?
So right now, there's no good answer to that question. Most of the infections that have been studied that I'm aware of involve study of rhinovirus, the common cold, an upper respiratory infection. And the results that we see are mixed. Some people who exercise during a cold report that they feel more comfortable, and that the cold isn't necessarily so severe that it's influencing their exercise time. On the flip side, we know across the board that improved aerobic fitness, improved neuromuscular fitness, just in general makes people healthier from cardiovascular disease, diabetes disease perspective as well. And so the reason why I think that's important is because we keep hearing about how, for 80% of this population, it's basically just a cold, and some people are walking around out there with no symptoms whatsoever. We're more concerned about an older, more vulnerable population. So my answer is rooted in just trying to get you to be less vulnerable, and physical fitness can be a very important way of keeping your overall cardiovascular, cardiorespiratory, neuromuscular systems working. And I can't promise you that if you have a healthy systems physiology going, that you're not going to get sick. But fingers crossed, if you are healthy, it will help your body to fight off that infection. Because as we've discussed before, we are completely dependent on your immune system to heal you. And so any steps that you can take from a nutritional, physical activity perspective, in my book, are probably steps in the right direction.
Yeah. For those high risk groups specifically, elderly, people who have, conditions and everything, are there any specific things that they can do outside of that, or even like recommendations for, exercise for elderly that isn't too severe in terms of impact or anything along those lines?
Well, again, what I'm going to recommend might be a little unconventional, but older people have a more difficult time with sleep. They often don't sleep as many hours. And so even though it's not really an exercise answer, if you are in that vulnerable category, make sure that you're getting plenty of sleep and that your sleep quality is as good as it can be. And for some people, that might be brewing a cup of chamomile tea and, just relaxing a little bit before you go to bed. Turn off all the, the smartphone and the mobile so that you're reducing that, influence of blue light. I know it's not a really good exercise answer, but I do think there's something strong to be said for improving your sleep quality, because that's been shown to help improve your immune system. Again, we're trying to mobilize your body's natural defenses should you be exposed to this pathogen. So there are things like that. I think one other thing that I would add from an exercise perspective is, yoga and Pilates. Those all can be done in the home, and there are videos that you can watch that kind of reconnect your mind body. And I can't go so far as to say, well, if you engage in yoga on a regular basis, Pilates on a regular basis, some of these, meditation-based exercises, that you're not going to get coronavirus. But I'd like to think that there is something to be said for becoming body aware, so that you're more vigilant about symptoms that you've got, and taking it from there.
Yeah. Want to turn it over to Mr. Schroth here. So you're in the midst of training clients right now. I know you kind of have a special setup with everything in the background right now. But for those people who don't have access to your at-home gym, what are some of the things that you're doing with them to, keep any semblance of progress moving, or even just maintenance of any gains that they have made? And then also, how are you just managing their expectations with progress, and just being a good coach during this time?
So to answer the first part of your question, if nobody has any access to equipment whatsoever, body weight is definitely my first recommendation. I know a lot of people don't really enjoy just strictly body weight exercises, especially the population that I work with. They like to lift very, very, very heavy weight or very low reps. So the thought of doing body weight exercises for very, very high reps and becoming extremely comfortable with that lactic acid build, not something that most of my clients enjoy. But I tell them that even if you don't enjoy it, if the gym is like or make right, hobby, it's our meditation. It's what anchors us when things in the world are going crazy, and things right now are going crazy. Then whatever it is that you're able to manage to do, whether that's push-ups and pull-ups, body weight squats, it's going to be better than doing absolutely nothing and becoming anxious and becoming depressed. Especially, we don't know how long it's going to go on. So I tell them, if you have access, not in a place like yourself, Michael, you're not in a city where they don't allow you to go outside whatsoever, you can go to a local park. There are.
You can do what? You cut out a little bit. What is? Go ahead. You're good.
Oh, okay. So I tell them that if you have access to a local park, for example, here, there are a lot of local parks that are outfitted as mini body weight. You could go to anywhere with a jungle gym, and you've got bars to do pull-ups on, to do dips, to do inverted rows on, and things fairly simple. If you do a squat pattern, a hinge pattern, an upper body push, an upper body pull, you do a few sets of those for higher repetitions, obviously, then you're good to go. And that kind of goes into the managing expectation part. A lot of my clients are going to be losing strength and muscle mass throughout this quarantine, and I assure them that they are not going to be losing much strength or muscle mass, if any at all, if they do something. If you quit cold turkey, say I'm just gonna I'm gonna hibernate and wait until it goes over, and then I'm gonna go back to the gym and hit it. If this goes on for a month, 2 months, then I can guarantee you're probably gonna lose some strength, some. But if you do even a little bit, we were talking yesterday. There was a study published or shared by Berger that basically showed that the group that they experimented on did, I believe it was 1/8 of their normal training volume, and they lost no muscle mass. So it's that data is very promising, and I think that clients, just letting them see that you don't have to do a ton to help maintain what they built is very helpful.
Yeah. So I just want to summarize what you said, because you kept coming in and out a little bit. Basically, what you're saying is that this paper was shared by Brad Schoenfeld, who's a very credible researcher in the strength and conditioning field. Basically, saying that there was a group of individuals who were training at you said an eighth of,
an eighth they normally train at, 1/8 of their normal.
They're training at 1/8 of their normal training volume, or just doing basically an eighth of the amount of work that they normally do. And during this time period, they didn't see any, was it muscle mass loss or strength specifically?
Muscle mass. This was
they didn't see any loss in muscle mass, which is a different thing from strength.
So you can, like, to simplify, right? If you did 8 working sets of bench and you brought that down to 1 working set per week, that was enough to maintain your muscle.
It's a good way to frame it. Yeah. Cool. That's helpful. And I think, just at least for all the meatheads out here like myself, knowing that I don't need to do 50,000 reps of bicep curls because I only have 10 pounds available to me, that's reassuring for sure. Want to change the subject here really quick over to reliable sources of information and credible sources, because like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, there's a lot of good information that's being shared and not so good. And so I want to give people just a couple of resources that they can refer to for just general coronavirus related information. And if that's the World Health Organization only, then we'll go with that. But if there's anything else you guys know of, please feel free to share. And then also just ways in which I also want to share with people ways in which to think critically and just give them the tools to do that so they can discern what is good from what is not so good. So I think, Dr. B, you might be a good resource for this. So I'm going to go ahead and let you answer here.
Well, I'll get our conversation on this started. It's got to be really tough for people out there to figure out what is and what isn't credible. And it's just difficult to find good information to answer questions. I'll give you a couple of examples of struggles I've had. I thought, well, suppose I were to come down with COVID-19 and I start feeling symptomatic, and I realize, you know what, I'm sick. I need to stay home and take care of myself. I found a very difficult time figuring out how long does this thing run? Like how long should I expect to be sick? You think that for sure we have those numbers. And so I have a kind of an indirect source that suggested from, I want to say it was the World Health Organization that suggested that you're looking at about a 2-week, proposition there. Sometimes it can go up to 4 weeks to 8 weeks or so. And so I'm very sympathetic with the general public just trying to get basic information about this disease. It's hard to find this. Another one that I was concerned about the other day is there was one where I was interested in like some aspect associated with the portion of the population that is not symptomatic, and how would they know if they are transmitting this disease or not if there's no symptoms that you're dealing with. And it's just really hard to find recommendations from international bodies and domestic bodies here in the U.S. that say, these are the kinds of symptoms that you would think of as seasonal allergies, and these are the kinds of symptoms that you would think of for COVID-19. Again, 50% of the population who gets this disease, it's intestinal, it's GI. And so I'm sympathetic with the population that's, questioning this, and we want some good answers. I've been turning my attention to the World Health Organization, certainly the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, and I very much hope that we continue to fund those organizations because they're reliable. As a scientist, PhD, I turn to them for information as often as I need to. But another one I wanted to share with our listeners is Johns Hopkins. Johns Hopkins is a pretty well-respected research university and hospital system in Maryland. And Johns Hopkins, almost from day one, has been tracking the incidences of COVID-19 across the globe and across the United States. And they've got a wonderful geographic GIS system, information from geography, that shows where this is spreading and where some of our more concerning centers are. But the key thing that Johns Hopkins is doing in real time is they're actually calculating the number of infections. Those reports are coming in from county medical bureaus across the United States. They're reporting the number of people hospitalized, and they're reporting the number of deaths. And when you take a look at those numbers and you divide the number of affected victims from the number of deaths, you should be reassured to see that those numbers are actually quite low. And so, as we've discussed before, perfectly normal cold and flu season last year, 2018, 2019, 32.5 million people suffered the flu. And we're not anywhere near that with COVID-19. And so, making use of this information involves going to a reliable source. And I think between the World Health Organization and CDC, I think Johns Hopkins has done a great job. Those are some pretty good sources that you can start with.
And then in terms of, as we've seen from, looking online, Instagram, whatever it may be, other social media sources, there's unfortunately not just the CDC and the World Health Organization and Johns Hopkins posting content about this virus. There's other places that we may not know, but are saying promising things like drinking, this is just an example, drinking apple cider vinegar kills off the virus. That's not true. Please don't do that. But with someone who doesn't necessarily have a scientific background, or just, someone who doesn't have a scientific background may not be able to critically analyze something from good to not good. So can you, Dr. B, share some ways in which people can, critically discern between credible and not credible? What things to look out for?
There's a wonderful book that was published in the 1950s by Darrell Huff, and it's called How to Lie with Statistics. And that book is probably $3 online. You can buy it. And there's lots of examples going on right now about people just lying with statistics. And so one example of this is, when you take a look at some of the maps that I've seen that show the incidences of coronavirus, COVID-19 in different parts of the country, it maps perfectly to the population. So New York City, our most populous city, Los Angeles, our second most populous city, of course, are going to show high absolute rates of infection because that's where the people are. If you take a look at,
explain just the difference between absolute and relative really quick.
Yeah. So if you have a state that has 100 people in it, and you've got another state that has 100,000 people in it, and you've got 6 people infected in the 100 state and 6 people infected in the 100,000 state, well, you have the same absolute number of cases in both states, but you're dealing with a small state versus a large state population. That could tell a very different story if you take a look at the relative values. And so when we see that coronavirus is so prevalent in the state of New York, the geographer in me, and people should know I've got a Bachelor of Science in Geography, just has to laugh because you're also one of the most populous states in the United States. And so what you want to look at is the number of incidences in your state relative to the population that you've got, and not necessarily rush off to North Dakota, where it seems like very few people are infected. There's also a very small population in the state of North Dakota. So this How to Lie with Statistics is really coming to true life for me as a PhD, because I'm seeing examples of language that's being used in the media, soars and skyrockets. Well, if a state has 1 COVID patient and the next day that state has 2 COVID patients, they've just increased it by 100%, 100% increase in the state. Let's calm down here,
right?
Because you need to think about these numbers more carefully. So, I wish I could advise our listeners of some tried and true source of information outside of World Health Organization, outside of CDC. There's some good county agencies that are basically relaying information that they're getting from their experts. But it's kind of like anything else that we've talked about in the past. If an outrageous claim is being made, COVID-19 virus can make it 27 feet, and that seems to make the news. When I encourage people to be critical thinkers about this, if it seems like it's a pretty broad statement, if it seems like it's a pretty grand thing to say, it probably isn't going to stand up to scientific scrutiny. So just be careful about stuff like that.
Yeah. The way that I approach it is just, if it's too good to be true, one, it's most likely not true, and then two, just before you jump to the conclusion that it is true, just put your thinking cap on, do a couple of Google searches and just a little bit of research on the opposite of whatever the thing is saying. So going back to my dumb apple cider vinegar thing again, if one news organization is saying apple cider vinegar cures coronavirus, basically Google the opposite into your Google search. Apple cider vinegar does not cure coronavirus, and you're going to see articles for the same exact thing. So it's got to come from credible sources, and news organizations historically are not good organizations for disseminating scientific information. And actually want to talk real quickly about that in terms of epidemiological studies, because those are usually the studies that make headlines for the wrong reasons. And I'm going to turn it over to you again, Dr. B, to explain why that's the case.
Well, I'll just give you a quick answer. Epidemiologists, the function that they have in science is to look at relationships, and they play a very important role in science. They look at relationships. Every time I fill in the blank, this happens. And so they're looking at relationships. What science has a bigger challenge with, what science struggles with, is cause and effect. We look at statistics and we look at relationships, and we draw very tenuous conclusions on the basis of the data that we've got. We don't do a very good job in science of establishing cause and effect. And so it's great work that these epidemiologists are doing to take a look at the various relationships that we're seeing. But the full story of COVID-19 is not going to be told for a long time. And so, we've got to trust the experts, and we've got to listen to what people say. But I'm in agreement with you that if it seems like it's too good to be true, or if it's too grand, you might want to tune that out. And again, I'll say the same thing that I say all the time. Something doesn't make the news because it's ordinary. Something makes the news because it's extraordinary. And so don't let yourself get fooled, or don't put yourself in a fearful situation. Don't get scared about what you hear on the news, because it's news because it's something that doesn't often happen. And the likelihood of this happening to you needs to be tempered by the fact that you've got this relationship with the newscaster. You always check in with that particular site for information. Just relax a little bit. I'm going to tell you a story. I wear contact lenses. I wear rigid gas permeable contact lenses, and it made the news a while back that this man in Chicago took a shower with his RGPs in, his contact lenses in, and he got an amoeba in his eye, and it made him blind. It affected his vision. And I went to talk to my optometrist about that, and I said, well, I wear my contact lenses in the shower all the time. And he's like, well, yeah, but, and then he fills in the blank with all these contingencies that these people are doing that cause this problem. Well, none of the journalists, quote unquote journalists, ever told us the full story on that. It was just so sensational and so intriguing that this thing happened to this guy that they rushed it to the news without any facts about, well, were you predisposed to eye disease to begin with? Were your contacts clean? Did you, was the water sanitary? A bunch of other things that are going on. So I got scared about something that was so rare that it made my optometrist laugh.
Yeah. And just want to touch real quickly, all those things that you're talking about, was the water clean, were the contact lenses clean, all those things, those are what are called confounding variables, or externalities that can't always be measured, so to speak, but they have an effect on what the issue could be. So it could be a number of things. Just because it happened doesn't mean it's the contact lenses that are carrying these amoebas, for example.
And even if it is, and it reminds you to be more careful with your contact lenses and clean your contact lenses, maybe they serve the public service that way. But if it just scares a bunch of people, I'm not sure that that's really good, responsible journalism.
Or you could just wear glasses.
I
I want to
I
see
like my
glasses.
I like my contacts.
Huh?
I like my contact lenses.
All right, whatever. Well, we'll get you some glasses one day. I want to see Grandpa Berger. But I want to talk about just one more piece of what people use typically as evidence, which is anecdote, or basically taking a story that you hear and using that as truth, which unfortunately a lot of people do. And we've kind of seen this recently with the hydroxychloroquine, and in regards to that case in Arizona. So Jay, can you just describe what happened with that case in Arizona, and why, not why that happened, but just go ahead and describe the case, and we'll talk about it further.
So apparently there was an old couple in Arizona, and the wife was listening to one of President Trump's and he was talking about the hydroxychloroquine, which it has been anecdotally referenced as something that can be used to mitigate the symptoms for COVID-19. There are, as far as I know, there has been no actual research done on hydroxychloroquine to COVID-19. Again, but very hopeful. Was been pushing for the research to occur for hydroxychloroquine. So he wasn't recommending that anybody take this drug, the medical grade drug. Well, a lady who was watching the news just heard the chloroquine, and doing chores around her house one day, she saw a bottle or fish tank cleaner with one of the ingredients was chloroquine, not great chloroquine that somebody like your physician, your pharmacist would prescribe. She decided to take a few tablespoons of this, mix it with, it was like some soda water, and her drank it, and her husband died, and she was hospitalized. And she went ahead and blamed the president for all this because she said that he was the one who told her to take the chloroquine. And then we go back and watch the conference, no such thing. So this is kind of where we end up when all you do is take anecdote as evidence, and even more dangerously is you take anecdote and you take it out of context, which is even more dangerous because you could just walk yourself right into the ditch. That's what happened to this couple. Unfortunately, like, it's unfortunate that her husband died, but at the same time, what you did was really, really, really stupid, and you should have known better.
Irresponsible.
Very.
But yeah, so I wanted to bring this up to talk a bit more broadly about, yes, the coronavirus. If you hear someone say that this worked for me and I beat the coronavirus, so you should do it too. Which, at face value, when I say that like that, obviously it sounds silly, but I've seen many instances, whether it's with this virus or with people trying to make progress in the gym or with weight loss, they hear someone say, or they see an Instagram video that says, hey, my biceps grew this much size, or my butt got bigger because I did this, so you should do it too. They do it and it doesn't work, right? And I'm just not a big fan of anecdote, and I think it leads a lot of people to waste time, to waste money, and to also, even in this situation, to mess with their life. In this case, even the husband died because they chose to listen to anecdote before more evidence and research was presented for the hydroxychloroquine. I'm not saying anything about who they are as people, but anecdote is not a good basis of evidence to rely on. So if someone tells you this worked for me, I wouldn't directly just do what that person said. Any other thoughts on anecdote from either of you guys?
You know, I think using anecdote is okay, but we were talking about yesterday, when you talk about anecdote, the totality of evidence surrounding the subject you're talking about. For example, in our field, health and wellness field, and Dr. B, a lot of the research that has been done and that's being done, a lot of it was based on anecdote. It's
Right.
just that we have the capability to actually carry out research for specific subjects. Like Arnold was talking about giant sets and drop sets back in the day. All of that stuff was anecdote. And if we just totally dismiss that and none of our exercise physiologists decided to go in the lab and test it out, we would have known that these strategies are actually effective. So I think anecdote has a place, but I think you should take anecdote and the totality of evidence are. So you can't just use anecdote to say that it works without considering other variable beside it. So I think it has a place, but you shouldn't use it as a standalone.
Yeah, almost asking yourself, okay, maybe it worked in spite of what you were doing. So what were the other things that may have contributed to that? You know what I mean? So just another way to think about it. We're running up on pretty much covered the majority of the things that at least I wanted to cover, but I know Dr. B had just one other thing that he wanted to share, and so I told him I would give him an opportunity to share. So go right ahead. I don't know if you know what I'm referring to, but
I do, and you know, without preaching, I'll start by saying that tonight I got some ground beef, and I made a juicy Swiss cheese burger, and I had that with some potatoes and some steamed broccoli.
Did you get mushrooms? Did you steam some mushrooms? Or not steam, but
is it? Please tell me it was 85-15 or 80-20.
No, it was 85-15.
Right? If you told me 99%, you're cardboard.
No. Last week I got the ground turkey. This week I got the beef. So, you know, I'm not vegan. I'm not a vegetarian, but I think it's worth noting before we finish up that this virus, supposedly, if it's a virus that we're dealing with here, came from the animal kingdom, came from animals, and left in these wet markets from animals that are being sold as meat to human beings. And if you take a look at these wet markets, certainly some pictures came out of China, where in this province where this virus began, they're disgusting. And you know, there are live animals right next to slaughtered animals. That meat is not clean or sanitary, and it's being weighed on a scale, delivered to the customer, and then another round goes. And it's so obvious when you take a look at this market that it's just a cesspool of disease just waiting to happen. Now, maybe they've got immune systems in those villages that can handle stuff that I could never handle. But I am very pro animal rights and very pro humane treatment of animals. And I do think that when we analyze what happened here, we've got to go back and take a look at some of the horrors that we see in these wet markets as being the source of this mutation or of this virus. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't eat meat, but I do think that if people start to think more carefully about where their food comes from, whether it's tainted romaine lettuce or whether it's, you know, something that comes from an animal, a beef product or a chicken product, a turkey product, if that's going to make us more humane and more ethical and more sanitary in our treatment of animals for food, I think that that's going to be a major accomplishment, you know, a major you know, silver lining in all this suffering. But I was saying to my students the other day, you know, nature may be playing its revenge on us, and we need to take this very seriously.
Yeah. In terms of food safety, how are there any, like, whether it's certifying bodies or stickers on labels or anything that show that this is a reliable source of food where, like, the sanitation standards are high, and anything along those lines?
Well, I mean, if I'm going to eat something, it's not going to be from one of those wet markets. It's going to be from my supermarket here. But I mean, it's a good question to ask, because even among those of us who, purchase our meat in plastic wrap and, under USDA conditions, we still are in trouble. We're still struggling with how to keep our greens clean. Whether it's romaine lettuce, and there have been some outbreaks with other, green leafy vegetables that we encourage people to eat. We still see some contamination occur throughout the food supply, throughout the food chain, and nobody wants to get sick. And some of the consequences are minor, and you might not make the connection, but some of the consequences are very major. And so again, just repeating kind of a plea that I've got to people is to think carefully about where your food comes from. Because if we're not careful about this, this year it's going to be COVID-19. Next year it could be something else. And we really need to stem the origin of these pathogens, in my opinion.
Yeah. That's everything from me. Do either of you guys have last words or anything else to share before we finish up here? Dr. B took a drink of his seltzer water, so he's good to go, I assume.
Michael is asking me and Jay if we have any last words as we discuss COVID-19. I don't like the wording of that.
I told you I can't cough on you from via Zoom, so you're safe.
I don't know. I heard that these germs can spread through smartphone use, so I'm going to be careful.
Oh, geez. Now that's the one thing that people are going to get from this now. Like, oh, I use my smartphone.
I've been a lot more diligent about wiping my surfaces, wiping my phone. My hand washing hygiene has definitely improved. So, I mean,
are you guys at the point where you're wearing masks and gloves?
No, in Arizona, thankfully, we're definitely nowhere near the severity of cases as in New York. So no, some people are taking the recommendations to start wearing face masks, even if it's like a scarf around your face. But whether it's because we're not as affected, people aren't face masks religiously here. So
yeah. Well, I haven't donned the face mask yet, but I did wear gloves today to get a protein shake at the little store that's connected to my apartment. So if that tells you anything, that's where I'm at. Okay, well, it sounds like we're all wrapped up here. So thank you both very much for taking the time. I'm excited to have you all back here and talking to me because it's been so long. Jay, do you want to tell people what you want to say where people can find you?
Where they can find me?
On your Instagram and social medias and stuff.
Okay, because I can't give my address, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, you can, because otherwise all the meatheads are gonna come to your apartment because they see the bench in the back.
Yeah. I've had to be a little bit more strict with the with the appointments, actually, because I had people, I'm telling them, hey, you set an appointment for 8, people are coming in at 8:15, and they're like, I don't have time. I'm like, you're at 8, you just lost your time. So I had to be a little bit more strict with the people coming in, basically being punctual, because I'm getting more people, and I can only do one-on-one. It's like I only do 3 clients at max a day, because I get home very late. So it's like an 8 o'clock appointment, a 9:15 appointment, and a 10:30 appointment, and then that's it, because I have neighbors. It's a residential area. I can't have people dropping the 600 pounds on the floor and waking up the neighbors and with complaints. So
where can people find you? You didn't answer that.
You can find me on Instagram at agent_J Schroth. So you see my little name right there on the bottom left of my screen. You just add agent_J SCHROTH on Instagram.
_J Schroth Awesome.
Yeah. Last name.
Dr. B, I don't know if anyone can really find you because you don't have anything. I've been trying to get Dr. B to make any kind of social media for years now. I think he's finally making a LinkedIn page. So if you want to find him there, you'll be able to find him soon. But he doesn't seem to be in any hurry to do that. So I don't know.
Nobody will help me. I keep asking. Nobody's going to help me.
Are you kidding me? I hope that's sarcastic. Alrighty.
Well, I mean, you're at home a lot more. Maybe this is the time. Even if it's just an Instagram page, Dr. B. I don't think you necessarily have to mess with Twitter or Facebook, but I think Instagram would be a very good platform for you. I think you have a lot of good information.
Everybody wants to see you post a selfie every morning.
Yeah, and I think people would be very. I think you should definitely at least consider an Instagram page.
All right.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. You can find me on the IGs at Mikey_Ernesto, ERNESTO. Go to the website, agora10.com, AGORATEN.com. Thank you for listening to the Agora podcast. I know I didn't say that at the beginning, but you can find the podcast at the website as well. All right, everybody, we're signing off. Stay safe, stay healthy, wash your hands, wash your butt, do all the things that you should be doing anyway. See you next time.